Here's what's coming up on the world today. Israeli ground troops continue aerial assaults on Gaza. Russian President Vladimir Putin makes a surprise visit to the UAE for bilateral talks. Plus, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologises for loss of life and suffering at COVID-19 inquiry. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. We begin with the Israeli army not backing down on its ground operations in Gaza as troops continue to advance towards the south. Videos showing ground troops operating in Gaza and aerial strikes on Hamas targets a day after the military reached the heart of the southern Gaza town of Khan Yunis. And the footage shows soldiers engaging combat in residential area, armored vehicles moving and tanks firing ammunition. Soldiers could also be seen revealing what they say is an explosive device that was placed inside a school. Aerial footage showed strikes in what the Israeli army said were Hamas militants and command centers. Hamas's armed wing, the Al-Qassam brigades, on the other hand, say its fighters had destroyed or damaged 24 Israeli military vehicles, and snipers had killed or wounded 8 Israeli soldiers in the ongoing clashes in various areas of Khan Yunis. Well, earlier, Israeli forces say they have tightened the noose around southern Gaza's main city of Khan Yunis. And this is what they call the most intense day of combat in 5 weeks of ground operations against Hamas militants. Israel said its troops, who were backed by warplanes, had reached the heart of Khan Yunis and were surrounding the city. The commander of the Israeli military's Southern Command, General Yaron Finkelman, said in a statement Israeli forces were also fighting in Jabalia, a large urban refugee camp north of Gaza. After days of ordering residents to flee the area, the forces dropped new leaflets on Tuesday with instructions to stay inside shelters and hospitals during the assault. Leaflets addressed to the residents partly reads, "Don't get out. Going out is dangerous. You have been warned." Meanwhile, injured Palestinians were rescued from under the rubble after their houses were destroyed in the middle of the night in an Israeli strike on Al Ammar neighborhood in Khan Yunis. One of the survivors, Hamdi Tanira, said there were 30 people inside the house, among them 20 children, and they were getting ready to sleep when the strike hit. The United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk says Palestinians are living in utter, deepening horror. Similarly, the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees say more than 600,000 people are under evacuation orders in southern Gaza, adding that there's nowhere to go. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says 73 people have been killed, 123 others injured in central Gaza in the past 24 hours. In the meantime, Hamas official Osama Hamdan says there will be no negotiations for exchange of detainees until Israel's aggression against the Gaza Strip stops. He adds that Hamas holds Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that is, fully responsible for the lives of the Israeli hostages and for obstructing the completion of the exchange deal. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani said that Qatar is working to restore the truce and secure the release of more hostages. However, Israel's army spokesman Daniel Hagari confirmed there are still 138 hostages being held in Gaza, calling on the international community to do more to secure their release. And the World Health Organization says the situation in Gaza is deteriorating by the hour as Israeli bombing intensifies in the south. Speaking via a video link, WHO representative in Gaza, Richard P. Pacon, says the body is deeply concerned about the vulnerability of the health system and the densely populated enclave as more people move further south to escape the bombing. Meanwhile, spokesperson for UNICEF, James Elder, says the areas of Gaza designed as safe by Israel were nowhere near meeting basic requirements, warning that the absence of sanitation and shelter there have created a perfect storm for disease outbreak.
It's getting worse by the hour. I mean, like there's intensified bombing going on all around, including here in the southern areas, Khan Yunis, and even in Rafah. Even what I've seen over the last couple of days, that we see an vastly increasing number of IDPs coming from the so-called middle area and even now the southern areas towards furthermore to the south. And I think we are close by it's humanity's darkest hour, and has been the message, I think, from WHO, the UN in general. This bombings and I would say a senseless loss of life must stop now. I mean, we need a sustained ceasefire. Maybe I want to say something about maybe our biggest concern, and that is the vulnerability. The vulnerability of and looking at for a health perspective, the vulnerability of the health infrastructure. So the health infrastructure in Gaza, the health system is crippled.
It's not a safe zone if it's only free from bombardment, as some zones have not been. It's a safe zone when you can guarantee the conditions of food, water, medicine, and shelter. Okay? Now, I've seen for myself, these are entirely absent. You cannot overstate this. These are tiny patches of barren land, or they're street corners, they're sidewalks, they're half-built buildings. There is no water, not a little bit. There's no water, no facilities, no shelter from the cold and the rain. So we have the perfect storm for disease outbreak. Remembering, of course, in this specific case of Gaza, Israel is the occupying power. It's they who have to provide food, water, medicine. So now, given we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people right now, this minute, who are moving somewhere with bombardments at scale, 200 a day yesterday, aerial bombardments, as we speak, the only possible way to create safe spaces in Gaza that are truly safe, that protect human life, is for the hell to stop raining down from the sky.
And it's still more knocks for Israel, this time from the United States, as it says Israel is not doing enough to allow more fuel and aid into Gaza and should step up efforts. It's coming from the U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, adding that Washington is engaging with Israel to allow more trucks in.
I will say that what the United States is doing to address that very situation is, number one, making clear to Israel that we do not want to see this campaign conducted in the South the way it has been conducted in the North. We are 4 or 5 days into this campaign in the South. It's just started again after the pause. It's too early to make, I think, overall assessments about how it's going, but certainly I know for civilians on the ground, conditions are incredibly difficult. We are engaging with the government of Israel at every level to try to increase the amount of humanitarian assistance that is getting in, so people do have food and people do have water. We are working with UNRWA to try to identify sites where civilians can go to be safe from harm, and working with the government of Israel to ensure that those sites are protected and are not targeted. There is not enough being done right now. The level of assistance that's getting in is not sufficient. It needs to go up, and we've made that clear to the government of Israel. The level of fuel that is going in is not sufficient. It needs to go up, and we have made that clear to the government of Israel. And we will continue to engage with them on every level, precisely to try and address the very real human suffering that your family member is going through, and we know so many civilians in Gaza are. There is not enough fuel, there's not enough food, there's not enough water getting in. The number of trucks currently getting in, around 100 a day, I think it was 100 yesterday, is lower than it was during the pause. It needs to be higher.
Right.
And we are engaging with the Israeli government to encourage them to allow more trucks to get in.
Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department will impose visa bans against individuals involved in undermining peace, security, or stability in the occupied West Bank. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said this in a statement Tuesday, announcing a new visa restriction policy. According to him, the restrictions will target those who have committed acts of violence or taken other actions that restrict civilians' access to essential services and basic necessities, and may also apply to those individuals' family members. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller told reporters the first bans under the new policy would be imposed and more designations will be made in the coming days, adding that it would ultimately impact dozens of people.
Violence in the West Bank this year is at levels not seen since the Second Intifada. And in recent weeks, an alarming surge in violent acts has driven this unwelcome record even higher. This includes unprecedented levels of violence by Israeli extremist settlers targeting Palestinians and their property, displacing entire communities, as well as violence by Palestinian extremist militants against Israeli civilians. Today, as President Biden recently warned, the United States is taking action to address this escalating violence in the West Bank by implementing a new visa restriction policy under Section 212A3C of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Under this policy, the United States will pursue visa restrictions against individuals involved in or meaningfully contributing to the undermining of peace, security, or stability in the West Bank.
Joining us now is security consultant Onyekachi Adekoya. Thanks for joining us on the program. Let's get your perspective, your reactions to the resumed ground operations by Israel in Gaza.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, we're not sure what's happening really in that part of the world currently. Some have argued that the Israelis have rather responded from a place of emotion than a place of tact. And it's understandably since the events that happened in October 7. Again, the Prime Minister of Israel did warn that even though they had agreed to a ceasefire, that just immediately after the ceasefire period, hostilities again will resume. So it's difficult to make sense of what the end game is or what the desired end state of the current military actions in Gaza would be. One is not sure what Israel wants to do with the over 2 million people clustered around that small space. So I'm not sure what to make. It's a lot of emotions flying around, but it's a sad one for humanity. Would just be my own assessment. And again, we're not sure of what the desired end state of any of the parties would be and how all this would end. And
Hamas official is reported as saying that there will be no negotiations or exchange of detainees until Israel's aggression stops. You know, can we trust that?
Yeah, I mean, Hamas has shown that despite the relentless bombardments, and again, if you look at the operation undertaken by the Israelis, with their multiple points of attack, trying to cut off north from south, and all the actions they've taken, they've not shown the ability to get to the hostages. I think the initial hesitation to negotiate was with the hope that maybe they could get to the hostages and again forego any negotiations. Hamas on its part has shown that they can walk their talk, and if they say there'll be no further negotiations. Remember also that the Egyptians, also the Qataris, also some support from the talks, I had to also impress on Hamas to also go into some of these negotiations to release hostages. So if Hamas has made that statement, clearly Hamas has shown that it retains the capability to continue to launch rockets from Gaza, hold the hostages until conditions become favorable. Now, granted that we are seeing now increased
And we are hearing of the humanitarian situation that's deteriorating by the hour. Do you think that there perhaps is a non-kinetic way to sort of, sort this out?
Difficult question. There are a number of legs to some of this geopolitical spat you're seeing going on. The true actors here are not just Hamas and Israel. You have regional actors. You have the US on the one hand. You have the Chinese interest. Interestingly, for the first time in a long time, we see almost the Shiites and the Sunnis almost having some form of convergence in thought as to what will happen within that space. I mean, when you had the issues in 1973, the US had the leverage to call Israel to a stop when they had crossed the Suez Canal. But due to, I think, some considerations of politics in the US, you can hear the White House make statements. It's short of calling for a full hold on hostilities, and short of also removing all American assets within the Mediterranean. I mean, if America doesn't do that, and I don't think they have any leverage. So it looks like on the part of the Israelis, the US has the most leverage to call for a ceasefire. On the part of the Hamas, I mean, maybe the Qataris, the Iranians, the Turks, the Saudis can call for that. But for now, it looks like it's all gloves off. Again, the question is, we are not sure of the desired end state of Israel. They are beginning to use up the goodwill that they are enjoying from the US. Some think that this goodwill can run to an infinite cost, but elections around the corner is currently hurting the current administration in the US. There's also the war in Ukraine, and then you look at this. So I don't see a ceasefire occurring, except some forces beyond the two parties acts upon them to bring about a truce. I don't see that happening.
If we circle back to October the 7th, would you say that, Hamas acted alone? There is the perspective of a security analyst who says they might have had a backing from Iran.
Yeah. So we've had a lot of analysts make analysis. Some have also likened the October 7 event to the apartment bombings in Moscow, which some argue was a false flag operation that then led to the bombardment of Chechnya. Again, there's an argument to make that if the Prime Minister in Israel, who of course has been hawkish and has always taken a far-right approach to the issues of Gaza and the Palestinians and the increment of settlements within the West Bank and the other issues around it, that this could have never been, there could have never been a better time for anything like this to have happened than this time, because in 2024, it's not likely that the Democrats will return to the White House. And if you have a Trump presidency, the permutations and considerations may be different. So there's also an argument that perhaps a false flag operation has occurred. There's an argument to say that perhaps Hamas outwitted the Israeli algorithms and AI systems they had used to, of course, they had SIGINT, signal intelligence, human intelligence, and all the streams of data they used to analyze what Hamas would be doing were fooled by Hamas in the lead up to some of the actions. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, the activities that happened in October 7, some argue that it was a clear military raid. Some of the bolster and the hot air that was released in terms of beheading of people, raping, some of that has turned out not to be true. And we've seen a number of international media organizations walk back some of the claims that happened since the day. But clearly what happened on October 7 was a targeted military raid. There was also some friendly fire on the part of the Israelis that led to the numbers of casualties. We can also see the Hamas on their own end trying to also run some propaganda campaign, particularly at the period of how they handle the hostage, how they treat the hostage, and how they release the hostage. So clearly, by my own assessment, I reckon that there was some overconfidence, some conceptual problem with the concept of how Israel had set up its own security, with over-reliance on algorithms to detect and sense, and also correctly assess what the actions or threats would be to Israel. Also on the part of Hamas, they were also able to game the system and conduct a clear military raid. If you look at what a military raid, the objective of military raids are, it's just a surgical operation to achieve an objective, and after which that sabotage party would also withdraw back to safety. I wouldn't say, because there's a lot of murky waters around what really happened on the day, whether Hamas acted out of proportion or within reasonable proportion. But it is clear that the first objective was a military raid. And of course, it is said that everybody has a plan until it gets hit in the face. So maybe activities on the day snowballed into some other casualties that may or may not have been planned or anticipated, particularly on the part of the Israelis in trying to respond to the activities of October 7.
Final note, perhaps when you look back at, what has always been bandied around Israel's military and espionage services being considered among the world's best, what's your assessment right now with the breach in, the Israeli intelligence?
Well, in terms of the intelligence failure, it's likened to what has happened in Kaduna here in Nigeria. Sometimes these things will happen. Because there's no system that is 100% fail-proof. And we also say that in risk treatment that there can never be zero risk. There would always be an element of risk. These blips do not in any way or form completely impair the capability of a country like Israel. It also shows that sometimes human errors, sometimes some tackiness, sometimes some laxity, sometimes some conceptual problem. You see, the problem was the over-reliance on systems and algorithms to pick up and detect threats. And the argument that we make against AI, to also say that, again, there's always that place for good old-fashioned assessor at a desk who is a human being, who is able to make a judgment call. Sometimes if things are too quiet in a place like that region, you should also be worried. So maybe there was some bit of overconfidence on the part of the Israelis. Doesn't in any way impair their capabilities. Remember that Israel has not come out to acknowledge their possession of a nuclear weapon, which would also say that, which also show you that there's also the hesitation on the part of adjoining nations to also rush into a conflict with Israel, because Israel still packs a significant punch. Now, with the military flotilla in the Mediterranean, and I think a carrier group is now in the Persian Gulf, the capability and capacity of Israel to respond to any threats, if you also listen to their warnings to Lebanon, it's been very stern, and they've been very clear-minded as to what they want to do. If you also look at the amount of munitions dropped so far on Gaza and the continuing bombardment and the posture of the Israeli army, one doesn't get the impression that they are running out of steam, running out
All
of
right.
gas, or running out of equipment or capability. Yeah.
We'll continue to see how things develop. We appreciate your insights into this issue. Security consultant Onyeka Chiadikria, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Here's what's happening. The latest Russia's war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told Hesed that Kyiv will defeat Russia and win a fair peace against all the odds, as the future of vital military and financial aid from Washington appears to be hanging by a thread. Mr. Zelensky delivered the defiant message in an unusual early morning video to Ukrainians, in which he was shown walking through the streets of Kyiv on his way to pay his respect to soldiers killed fighting as Ukraine marks the day of its armed forces. He said that Ukraine had no alternative except to liberate its territories occupied by Russia. He also paid his respects at a wall of remembrance created in 2014 to commemorate victims of Russia's war against Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says Kyiv did not expect wartime support from its partners to decrease. The remarks at a news conference in Kyiv comes amid a darkening outlook for Ukraine, with uncertainty swirling over the passage of major assistance packages from the EU and also the US. Ukraine has relied heavily on military and economic aid from the West to hold out against and push Russian forces back since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion February 2022.
Our partners understand that what is at stake in Ukraine is much, much bigger than just the future of Ukraine. And therefore, I do not anticipate any slowdown or any decrease in the neither attention nor support that is coming. No one will ever put us at the table with Russia until we ourselves decide that this is the way forward. I think we have proven many times before that we are not the ones who can be hand-walked.
We also discussed Ukraine's aspiration to become a member of the European Union. I'm glad to say that we are positive about the European Commission's recommendations to open access negotiations with Ukraine, because your future is with us.
Well, over to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has made a surprise visit to Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, for bilateral talks. During a meeting with the UAE President Putin said relations between Russia and the United Arab Emirates are at an unprecedented high. On the other hand, the UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed notes that the UAE is Russia's biggest Arab investor and its largest trading partner in the Gulf region. He adds that his country is looking forward to expanding cooperation with Russia, especially in areas including innovation, energy, infrastructure, and new technologies. Mr. Putin, in a rare trip abroad, will also visit Saudi Arabia and is expected to hold talks with Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to discuss oil, OPEC Plus, and the conflict in Gaza and Ukraine.
فإن الإمارات هي أكبر شريك تجاري خليجي لروسيا.
And now to what's going on in Sudan. The army has intensified airstrikes in the capital city, Khartoum. This is despite Saudi and US brokered talks that's aimed at halting the current fighting. The lack of progress at the talks in the Saudi city of Jeddah dashed hopes for resolution of the conflict between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF. Residents in Omdurman, a city that adjoins Khartoum, said the army keeps firing artillery aggressively that often lands in civilian homes. Talks in Jeddah were first suspended in June and resumed in October. The discussions are currently adjourned this week, with no new agreement. The months-long war has displaced more than 6.5 million people, devastated the economy, and triggered ethnic-driven massacres in Darfur. And VOA's Nairobi Bureau Chief Mariama Diallo joins us now for more. Hi, Mariama. Talk to us about what appears to be renewed fighting in the capital city, Khartoum.
Thank you for having me. Yes, according to reports, rhetoric actually from the Sudanese army has escalated, and airstrikes have also intensified, according to residents in Khartoum. At the same time, you have the other side, the RSF, that is also reported to be gaining ground when it comes to other areas such as the Darfur and the Kordofan region. Since the war started, obviously, they talk about 6.5 million people who have been displaced inside and outside of the country. So at this point, the people who are able to flee have been fleeing in neighboring countries of South Sudan, Chad, as we've seen in other countries. But those who have not been able to go, who have no choice but stay in the country, have been the one who are bearing the brunt of some of these bombings, because they report that when they have these airstrikes, where it's landing into civilians' homes.
And this war between the Sudanese army and the RSF has dragged on for over 7 months. Given the current status of the Saudi-US brokered talks, I mean, that's supposed to be aimed at, bringing this conflict to an end. Do you think that there is perhaps there will be renewed negotiations, both sides coming to the table to settle this?
Well, it's almost actually 8 months, given that we are just about to enter the second week of December, when the war started back on April 15th. Yes, maybe there is hope that negotiations will resume again, but from the history, what we've seen is that even just the last Jeddah talks that took place resumed from the talks back in June. That was suspended, and it took a few months before talks resumed again. So we've seen it in the past, 7.5 months, almost 8 months, that negotiations have come and gone, ceasefires have come and gone, agreements or the lack thereof have also come and gone. I think recently what we've seen is that, I think just a few days ago, sanctions that have happened from the United States to 3 individuals who the U.S. accused of being the antithesis, fomenting this war, helping this war continue. So maybe that could make a dent into this. But at this point, given the history of everything we've seen the past 8 months, I think it's only hope that negotiations could resume, but also it's not just at this point about negotiations and trying to sit around the table, finding a solution. It's just nothing is working. As I said, things have come and gone with no respect and no fear also of paying for not respecting some of these agreements. So yes, a lot of hope, but I hope as well that the various stakeholders are thinking about other ways of making this war stop, or at least trying to make certain things hold when it comes to ceasefires, for example, so that humanitarian aid can access some of these areas that are not accessible because of everything that's been going on.
Well, we're looking at more than 6.5 million people who have been displaced so far. Do we know what residents in Omdurman, and perhaps neighboring cities, how they feel about this, seeing as, the holidays are fast approaching, how they're holding up?
Well, I actually covered a recent event, I think it was last week, when a group of Sudanese women came from all over the place, actually. Some of them took 3 to 10 days on the road in buses so they can be part of this mini conference, a 2-day conference in Nairobi. They just didn't come from Sudan, but they came as far as the United States, just activists, everyone who has been doing and trying to help in this war. They were present here to try, basically, talking about the fact that their voices are not being heard. And during that conference, actually, which I covered 1 day of it. And I have to tell you, just listening to some of those stories of loss, some of those stories of rape, violence, just about everything horrible that you can imagine, some of those women were talking about it. I mean, there was not a dry pair of eyes during some of those sessions. It's just heart-wrenching, heartbreaking to hear some of these stories from basically people who are living the issues on the day-to-day basis. You talk about the holidays, you talk about Christmas, and, hoping, as like everybody else, that maybe that will play a role in these two generals for them to take a break or to say that, let's figure out something. But the reason why I bring this up is that I remember when the war started back on April 15th, it was on the eve of Eid. I remember that, most Muslim people who went through a whole 30-day of fasting were looking forward to celebrating the Eid. And they also thought that maybe the two generals will be sensitive to one of the biggest holidays, Muslim holidays, and that the war will stop at that time. And no, it didn't. It didn't make any difference. So 8 months into it, I hope, I'm sure a lot of people hope that maybe, something like the December holidays will make a difference. But that is really hard to predict, given the history that we've seen so far.
Indeed, and Mariama, even as journalists, it can be frustrating, just talking about it without end. But we'd like to thank you. We appreciate your thoughts and the updates on this.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
VOA is now... Welcome back, and we're in Australia, where an American man has been arrested in connection with the religiously motivated killing, we understand, of 2 police officers and a third person in rural Australia last year. 26-year-old Constable Matthew Arnold and 29-year-old Constable Rachel McCrow were killed last year while attending what police have called a terrorist attack at a remote property in Wiambilla, around 300 kilometres northwest of Brisbane. A 58-year-old neighbour was also killed in that attack. According to police in Australia's Queensland, the 58-year-old man was arrested by the Federal Bureau of Investigations, FBI, in Arizona on December the 1st for allegedly sending extremist Christian materials to the 3 people who carried out the shooting.
Today I can advise that international cooperation has resulted in the arrest of a 58-year-old man in the United States as a major investigation continues following the murders of 2 police officers and a member of the public during a shooting incident in the Western Downs last year. We know that the offenders executed a religiously motivated terrorist attack in Queensland. They were motivated by a Christian extremist ideology and subscribe to the broad Christian fundamentalist belief system known as premillennialism. The motivation of the United States national is still under investigation by the FBI. The attack involved advanced planning and preparation against law enforcement.
The FBI has a long memory and an even longer reach. From Queensland, Australia, to the remote corners of Arizona, the FBI and the QPS worked jointly and endlessly to bring this man to justice.
We're back in Africa, where 5 civilians have been killed in Ethiopia's Amhara region after a drone strike hit an ambulance. According to witnesses, 3 other people, including a head of a local hospital, were also injured in the incident that happened in Morgeltena town, northeastern Amhara. The attack is said to have happened last week, but was only confirmed on Wednesday due to communications restrictions imposed by the local authorities. The federal forces are said to be using drones to target local militias as the violence that broke out in April continues to escalate. Last month, the UN said it was troubled by drone strikes hitting civilian targets in Amhara. It's been 10 years since South Africa lost its first democratic president, Nelson Mandela. Tata Madiba, as he is affectionately known, will always be remembered as a political force who gave up his life in service of South Africa. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samosa, went out on the streets and engaged with some locals to reflect on the life of Madiba.
It has been 10 years since the world bid farewell to a global icon and a symbol of resilience, Nelson Mandela. The CEO of Nelson Mandela Foundation, Sello Hatang, says hopefully African leaders will draw inspiration from the icon, as visionary leadership is still work in progress in the continent.
Those who are leading now are not leading with the same value system that Madiba had. A sense of selflessness, that you are there as a servant, not as the one who needs to be served, that you are there at the behest of your people. And I think if we are to begin to think like that, it means that we'll be bringing up more servant leaders.
I had the opportunity to speak to locals to hear their thoughts on Nelson Mandela's impact even a decade after his passing.
I wish if he was, maybe we were going to see more changes. Yeah, like now our youth are in drugs. I think if Utata was alive, I was going to stop all that, because now we don't have youth. Actually, I only see you, who is nice, clean, and bath. All our youth are on the street, no job, no nothing. I don't know where is this country taking us to, but I hope Ramaphosa is going to change things.
Okay, I remember him, 1994. It was a first a black vote, and then I see a lot of things because of that time. I was young, and then things changed.
Yeah, well, we still remember President Nelson Mandela because he was the hero. We are here and we are united with other people because of him. If it was not Mandela, we were going to struggle up until now. So I think Mandela is a hero and is a legend. Yes, he's an inspiration as a young person, because if it was not Mandela, I was not going to get to work. Because of Mandela, we've got freedom. We're living nice. We are united with white people now.
Well, Nelson Mandela would have been 104 years old this year. On the streets of Johannesburg, he's been celebrated for his contributions in the collaboration of the Bill of Rights and the country's now celebrated Constitution. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
And from South Africa to former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who said his government and its advisors had underestimated the scale and the pace of the challenge COVID-19 had posed to the United Kingdom. Mr. Johnson said he was deeply sorry for the loss of lives during the COVID-19 pandemic, as he appeared as a witness at the official inquiry into Britain's handling of the pandemic. The former Prime Minister said at the start of the hearing how glad he was to give evidence and how sorry he was for the suffering of victims and their families.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
2019, when you were invited to form an administration following the resignation of...
By your leave, my lady, can I just say how glad I am to be at this inquiry, and how sorry I am for the pain and the loss and the suffering
Sit down.
of
Please
the
stop.
COVID victims.
Please sit down. Please sit down, or I'm afraid you'll have to leave the hearing room. I'm sorry, if you don't sit down, I'm going to ask the ushers to get you to leave. Right, ushers, please, could you ask them to leave?
Snippets from the hearing earlier today. Well, staying with Britain, the government has signed a new treaty with Rwanda, which it says would overcome a court decision blocking its plan to deport asylum seekers to the East African country. Under the new deal signed by British Home Secretary James Cleverly, in which replaces a non-binding memorandum of understanding, Britain said Rwanda would not expel asylum seekers to a country where their life or freedom would be threatened, one of the court's major concerns.
The treaty that we signed today builds on that joint work. It takes the positive professional attitude that you and your government display and allies it with the work that the UK is doing to ensure that we break the business model of those evil people smuggling gangs. We want to make sure that people can live in safety and prosperity. But your country has made a clear and unambiguous commitment to the safety of people who come here. That has been displayed, and we have seen that in practice.
The treaty we are signing, to have just signed today, we reinforce the mutually beneficial framework for cooperation that we have developed. It will re-emphasize in a binding manner already existing commitments that address the concerns raised in the legal process about the protection of asylum seekers.
Wow. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be quick. I don't think it'll be that quick.
Yeah. Give us a chance,
Thanks.
And finally on the programme, Christmas came earlier to a zoo in London with as tigers, squirrel, monkeys, meerkats got a special holiday treat. The entire attraction is ahead of the start of the festive season as the zoo begins its countdown to Christmas, offering Yuletide events including crafts, marshmallow toasting and seasonal themed animal talks. The special festive events at the zoo runs until January the 7th, 2024.
Okay, mate.
So Christmas has come early to London Zoo, and if it's Christmas at London Zoo, it means it's Christmas for the animals. So we've seen some of the tigers today enjoying some Christmas boxes, the squirrel monkeys and the meerkats enjoying some slightly smaller treats. It's freezing cold today, it's 0 degrees, so it really is a reminder that it's Christmas and the animals are having a great day. It's fantastic. It's great for the whole family. Lots and lots of things to do. But importantly, it's a really good chance, especially for kids, to come and understand a bit about the conservation work we do, but at the same time enjoy seeing some wonderful animals. And mum and dad can have a nice, warm, festive drink as well. Lots of things to do for the whole family, but importantly, getting that conservation message through to everybody that comes.
Christmas at London Zoo at 0 degrees. Something to think about. That's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.